Hello, my name is Cece Wright. I'm the Director of Membership and Engagement, and you're watching DG Coffee Chats. Oh, it's so good. It is so good. Are we ready to go?
I think so. You know what? 1 second. Yep, ready.
My name's Ryanne Domingues. She, her, and I am the artistic director of Passage Theater. I also do a lot of freelance directing, and I am in Trenton, New Jersey. Is that everything? Is that everything I was supposed to say? Okay.
Perfect.
Hello, I'm Alexandra Espinoza. I use she, her pronouns. I am a theater artist. I count among those things playwright, director, performer, and general enthusiast. I am based in Philly and am currently in Baltimore visiting family. So if there are extra noises, it's because I'm a very blessed aunt, and we'll see how that goes.
Yay.
Thank you. All right, so let's just jump into the conversation. My first question is, what is a citizen artist?
I think a citizen artist is an artist who fully participates within their community and is active in their community and may or may not create art about with or with the community they live in, or art that is reflective of that community. That's the way I define it.
What about you?
I mean, for me, I feel like it's a I think you can be a citizen anything. I think that when I think about the term citizen artist, I think about all the other professions I thought I would have in my life before I thought I would be a professional artist. And in every iteration, it was something that was about the collective well-being. So I think that to me is what it means, that in the way that you apply yourself professionally, you're committed to a collective. And I definitely feel that way, having finally chosen to be an artist. And I feel like some of this is because I've been very deep in studying my birth chart recently. And I found out, based on a bunch of different astrological things, that like my mission in life is communication. And I realized that actually is why I am an artist, because I feel very driven to communicate with people. I think that art is our most efficient communication tool because it encapsulates the political, the spiritual, the emotional. So I think that's the other reason I'm a citizen artist, because ultimately whatever I chose to do with my life, I wanted to be able to communicate. And I think this is the best way to communicate.
Yeah, and I also think, like, when you are an artist, it's really important for you to choose the community you live in. You know, your art is going to, in theory, Xandra's talking about communication, you're going to be responding to the things around you. And so, you know, if I was growing up or I was living, you know, in some other country, my art would be reflective of what was happening in that country rather than reflective of what's happening in this country. So to me, being a citizen artist is being also engaged with your surroundings and communicating with those surroundings and having your art reflect that.
So can we take it just like a little more personal? Like how are you personally engaged in citizen artistry, or the concepts that you think of when you think of citizen artistry? Like what is the work? And if you have like specific things, please share.
I mean, for me, like specifically, like go to my website. It's alexandraespinosaplay.com, and it's very new, so I will plug it a lot. But it's the fact that thinking about a piece of art, and it's a little bit exhausting, is having to think about that piece of art from its inception to its development, to how it's promoted, to what happens when someone arrives at the physical place where this art is going to take place. Like it's a constant concern and advocacy for the audience you intend to share the art with. And I think that can be done very easily, or it can be done with a lot of roadblocks and red tape, depending on the institutions with whom you choose to partner in making that where you make your art.
Yeah. I mean, at Passage, right now we are in our Play Lab program, we are in the process of devising / writing 2 shows that are about Trenton. So one is the OK Trenton Project, which is all taken from interviews and verbatim interviews with the residents of Trenton about a specific event that happened here. And the other one is a new musical called Group about rehabilitation, like a rehab group, basically, that takes place in Trenton. And it's an all-female group, and they're all battling different addictions. So, so both of those pieces are so, Trenton is so alive, it's like another character in those pieces. So, you know, I think for me, because it's in Passage's mission to reflect our community, not only our community, but their interests and their questions and the issues that arise in our community. So for me, and you know, when I co-founded Simpatico, we were in the same, that's kind of where we sprung up. So Simpatico started in Philadelphia. We wanted to reflect the issues of Philadelphia at the time. That was back in 2005, which was, Philadelphia was a completely different city back then, right? So the shows we were doing were reflective of what the issues we thought were important to Philadelphia at that time. So I think it's kind of always the work that I've done. And it's really connected to what Alexandra was saying, where you're aware of the audience and the community that's coming in that theater. So there are shows I would do in Trenton that I wouldn't do in other places. There are shows I would do in other places that I wouldn't do in Trenton. There are things that I'm more sensitive to here than when I direct in Philadelphia or when I direct in Princeton. So I think knowing your audience and knowing the people you're creating to work with is really, really important. You know, when I was doing work in Philadelphia, a majority of the artists I worked with were from Philadelphia. Well, now when I'm up in Trenton, I'm getting artists from New Jersey, I'm getting artists from New York, right? They have completely different backgrounds, completely different training, completely different perspectives. So when I'm devising a piece, I have different things coming in the room. So I think that for me, being a citizen artist and being somebody who works within the community really shapes and has a huge impact on the art I create, especially when it's stemming directly from that community.
And what I find interesting, and I didn't do this by design, or maybe I did, I don't know, but the two of you are coming from two different angles into the, so like Alexandra, you're a freelance artist, and Ryanne, you are the head of an institution. And I'm curious about, you alluded to this earlier, some of the like potential roadblocks and things that may come up. Like what are those that you've experienced that maybe you didn't expect because the space you were coming into, you thought, you know, this would be a no-brainer, or some of the ones that you did expect, and how you handled those situations?
I think for me, being the head of an institution now, it's funny. The artistic choices I make, you know, whether I want them to or not, are representative of Passage Theater. You know, there are things that I, as Ryanne, really, really might believe in and might want to champion and might want to flag and jump up and down for, but I have to be, I'm in charge of an institution, and that institution is not me, and I am not the institution. So if I'm going to be doing a show or I'm going to be doing something, I have to, you know, oftentimes I'm running it by the board and I'm saying, you know, is this something Passage is comfortable stating? I know how I feel about it, but I'm not all of Passage Theater Company. And so, you know, I think when I was a freelance, well, so I'm a do freelance work, but I think it leaves a little more room, or it left a little more room for me to, I could do the art I wanted to do, and if it jived with a theater, great, and if it didn't, great. But I think, you know, when I'm doing work at Passage, I just have to be careful because, you know, the institution is not here to be it's not a political or a religious or a, you know, affiliated theater in that way. And so much art, especially now, is really reflective of that. And so I have to say, hey, is this something that Passage is comfortable standing behind? And it's not just my decision anymore. So it's interesting. I think I can certainly take risks at my theater much more than other theaters can, but I respect the artistic directors who are working at theaters who cannot take the risks that I can take. And I understand that can be, speaking of red tape, that's actually a really, it's a tough struggle sometimes to have to say, okay, this is how I feel, but I can't say that right now. I don't know if Xandra, you feel like you are a little bit more free to.
I mean, I think the conversation has kind of morphed into a conversation on the landscape of how theater is made in this country, because I think that ultimately I have freedom and I have no means of production on my own. So I think that, and that's true for any freelance artist. So right. I think that it is interesting that we work in an industry where there's such monopoly on those two things, where the monopoly of quote unquote freedom or freedom of speech is in the hands of people who have no means of production, and the people who do have means of production feel silenced or that they can't show up fully when having those conversations. So I feel like it's less about being a citizen artist and more about making theater in America.
Yeah. So. Well, I think it goes back to, and you know, you have to remember that theater in America isn't subsidized by the government. It's we're all fighting for money and grants, right? And so, you know, at the end of the day, you have an audience to please, but more importantly, you have funders to please. And there have been things that, you know, you take a chance on. You say that funder's not going to like that, or that funder is going to like that, and you know, it's while like I said, I think I have more freedom than many. There are things. There's always the buck stops somewhere, and very often it's not with the artist, it's with the funder. And I think that's an important thing for people to remember, that that at the end of the day, I was actually thinking about this the other day, and I think it's with all nonprofit institutions, that they're not run by the nonprofits aren't run by the executive director or the artistic director, they're run by the board, or they're run by the funder. And so you have to ensure that, you know, you are tied to whatever your mission is. And I think that a lot of theaters are finding their mission statements a little more, I'm certainly not, but I've talked to other people who have started to find their mission statements a little more restrictive than they thought they were. So it's just an interesting conversation when it comes, because I don't think every theater feels they're in the position to be civically engaged right now.
So I would love to hear what you think about that, because I think it's so important to be conscious and aware of the community that you are working within. And when you're finding yourself not able to do that for whatever reasons there are, what do you do? I mean, I sound very naive right now, I understand, but I'm really curious. Do you think about that?
If you're not able to personally or institutionally? Or because there's a pandemic.
I mean, there's that too. I guess what I'm trying to get at is how do you continue to work in that way if you see yourself as a citizen artist, and community engagement is important to you in your work, and you're not able to do that. And if, to your point, Xandra, about this morphing to a conversation about the landscape of American theater, yeah, I mean, I think all these things are connected, but gosh, it's going to sound like I want to hear like a solution, but I just want to hear like your thoughts about things that you see that maybe could be changed, or maybe reframing the thought. If
I think something that,
yeah.
oh, sorry. I was just going to say, because it was something that came to mind a few questions ago as well, that I think that ultimately citizenship is something that is of scale. Like, you are a citizen of your block, you are a citizen of your
Right.
city, you are a citizen of your country. And I think that especially because of the pandemic, I feel like one of the responses that I have had has been to think more critically about how small those circles get, and to, you know, for example, I'm working in self-producing for the first time, partly because of the pandemic, partly because ultimately, even as a freelance artist, you don't have a lot of freedom, and sometimes if there's a certain thing you want to be said in a piece of work, the only way to get it said is if you do it yourself. But I do think that as those circles get smaller, like when I think about self-producing, for example, I am accountable to myself, but the second I ask another human being to be involved in the work, I am now accountable to them.
Yeah.
And so I think one thing I've been really trying to work on is to never let the scale of a project get bigger than my ability to ethically serve where that scale is. So, okay, do I have enough money to pay the 2 people I'm consulting? Do I have the budget to involve a designer, or do I not? Rather than being like, well, here's the budget and like, here's everything I need to make what I want happen, so everyone gets paid this and this and this and this and this small amount and this small amount. And I do think that that's something that ultimately is true no matter how large your circle of ethical responsibility gets. So to me, you know, my circle is a small circle because my resources are small, but
Right.
institutionally, what is your circle of ethical responsibility? And I think that to bring it back to like the landscape of how we do our work, I think that is ultimately what's happening in a lot of larger institutions right now, that they're having to actually, in a real way, and not in the ways before, I'm not going to qualify those, but they're having to actually ask, what is my ethical circle of responsibility? How large does it get? And, you know, when you do get grant funding, when you do get foundational funding, when you do get any kind of government funding, your ethical responsibility grows and grows and grows and grows. And I think that's ultimately the question, that to not be a citizen artist is to ignore whatever is your scale of ethical responsibility. And I think we all fail to do that at some times. And so I think it's really a question of like interrogating your own practices, from like how you treat your colleagues on an interpersonal level, to, you know, who do you use as your third party, you know, do you use ethical partners? You know, it grows and grows and grows.
I couldn't have said that better myself. That's exactly it. I feel I totally 100% agree. You know, the more people that you're asking to participate in this process, like you said, the more people that you have to consider. And it's not, theater is a collaborative art. It's the definition of it. You know, unless I'm doing directing and acting and writing and producing and doing, unless I'm doing everything on my own, I have to collaborate with other people that I'm responsible for. And I think that is where theater is really different. Visual artists can create a painting and go out and it can just be theirs, and they can put it out and the viewer sees it. That whole thing, you know, they have done. If I painted something, I painted it. But I think that because theater is so collaborative, it is, it's a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. And you have to kind of take that into consideration when you're creating it. And you have to be aware that the audience is your partner that never agreed to what you started with, right? So I could put something out there that I think is this beautiful statement, and the audience walks in and they say, that's not how I saw it at all. And now my statement has changed because of the way they've perceived it. And so you always have that wild card where you hope that what you're putting out there is accepted by that final partner that you know is going to be there at some point, or we hope is going to be there at some point.
I want to know if you have any parting thoughts, if there's something on this topic that you just want to share with us before we leave.
I don't know. I was really interested when you brought up the idea of citizen artist. I did a panel 2 weeks ago for the New Jersey Theater Alliance that was talking about it was a similar topic, engaging with the community. And we forget that theater has this long history of civic engagement, theater for social change, and people have done it. And so I was thinking about this today in so many different ways. You have the living newspaper, you have Brecht, you have Luis Valdez and the farm workers, like you have all these different people who have worked in civic engagement. And I'm curious as to, when we're looking at COVID and everything that's happening online, I think the way theater is engaging with its audience and engaging with its community is in the process of shifting and changing. But I said to my husband today, I don't know what that change is yet. I don't know. You look back on the theater of the 60s and 70s, and we're not working in the way that they did. But I don't know. I'm so curious. I want to fast forward 10 years and go, oh my gosh, that's what theater turned into. I'm curious to see if the form of theater is changing as a result of this, if that makes any sense, and how we engage with our community and how we engage with our audience is going to shift because of the online presence, because of COVID, because of how divisive the world is. If you would have asked me if we'd be doing the things we're doing in theater now 30 years ago, you know what I mean? So things are shifting. I don't know how yet because we're too deep in it. But I do, I just watched, it was very funny. I just watched the trial of the Chicago 7, right? On, what is that on? I don't know if you guys will watch it. It's on Netflix, I think. And my mother was obviously alive during that time. And I said, Mom, how much were you aware of the trial? And she said, well, I wasn't that aware of it. I read of it in the newspaper and stuff. And I was thinking about it. And, my daughter is going to look back and go, Mom, you were an artist back then, but you were stuck in the house. How were you responding? What were you doing at that time? And I'm like, oh gosh, I hope I'm going to, on the same note, like, I hope I'm going to have enough to say. I hope I'm going to be able to say, well, out of that came this. So I don't know. I'm trying to communicate and observe at the same time. And I think I don't know. I think it's an interesting time to be an artist. I just hope that years from now we look back on it and say, all right, we kind of dodged and we dodged and did that right. But I do think that what's important is that as artists, we're doing it together. I hope that we can learn from each other. I'm learning from a lot of artists now. I'm showing my age about how to do online things and how to collaborate with people in different ways. And younger people are teaching me things. And so, yeah, it's an interesting time, I think, both politically, socially and technology wise to be an artist. And you have to remember that in the 60s and 70s, they weren't dealing with screens. We have screens thrown in. So I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, Alexandra, any parting thoughts?
I think to kind of go with the through line of like, maybe this isn't a Venn diagram and maybe citizen and artist are ultimately the same thing. I was in a conversation this summer with a group of performing artists, mostly dancers. It's called Creating New Futures, which maybe people are aware of, but in which people were kind of naming the things that would make them excited to be able to make again when this shutdown, if this shutdown is over. And one of the things that kept coming up was universal artist income, which is such a small jump from universal basic income. And I think it's a perfect example of the more progressive your politics, the more the world will be friendlier for citizen artistry. And I think that, yeah, it's, you know, almost any progressive agenda point, if it were to happen, the world would be a better place for artists. So whether that's universal basic income, whether that's ending college, you know, ending student debt, I mean, so many policy points will ultimately, and will also expand the number of citizens who can be artists and who are not truly locked out of the industry because of trying to survive. So yeah, that's the last thing I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both so very much. I appreciate
Thank
this
you.
time. I hope that this was, I don't know, it was definitely helpful for me.